She stood barefoot in the driveway, covered in blood, whispering to a dog that wasn't there. When the officers asked what happened, she said, "He told me to do it. He said they had to die." Laura Kane's decline wasn't a sudden explosion of madness. It was a slow, creeping fog that settled in unnoticed. Friends later said she'd always been a little off, but not in a dangerous way. She was a homebody, soft-spoken, and preferred long walks with her dog Max over coffee dates or loud social settings. Her husband, Craig, chalked her quiet nature up to introversion, and her 2 teenage kids thought she was just a little eccentric, like when she talked to Max as though he were a person. Everyone talks to their pets, right? But Laura insisted he talked back. At first it was harmless. She'd laugh about how Max told her not to trust the mailman or that he didn't like the neighbors. But over time the jokes lost their humor. She began insisting that Max had preferences, moods, even opinions about the people in her life. "Max doesn't want Grace going to prom with Dylan," she once told her daughter, eyes wide and dead serious. Grace thought it was a weird joke. But Laura wasn't joking. She never laughed. The first real sign that something was wrong came when she pulled her kids out of school for a week without warning. She claimed there was something wrong with the air, and Max had told her it wasn't safe. Craig tried to argue with her, begged her to see a doctor, but Laura's response was chilling in its certainty. "You're not listening," she said flatly. "He's protecting us." Max became more than a dog. He became a guardian, a prophet, and in Laura's eyes, the only one who understood the truth. She began writing in a thick black journal, often staring into Max's eyes for minutes at a time before scribbling furiously, as if transcribing divine messages. The entries were bizarre. Warnings about shadows in the walls, numbers repeating in patterns, names underlined and circled, Craig's, Grace's and Ethan's. She began speaking in whispers even when no one was around, and often she could be seen standing in the backyard late at night, Max by her side, both of them staring at the woods as if waiting for something to emerge. Craig grew increasingly concerned. He set up an appointment with a psychiatrist, but Laura refused to go. "They'll twist it," she said. "They'll make me think I'm crazy so I stop listening to him." When Craig threatened to take the kids and leave, Laura sobbed uncontrollably for hours, then suddenly went silent and emotionless. That night she took all the knives in the house and locked them in her bedroom. She claimed it was for their protection that Max warned her someone, or something, was coming. Her eyes were red from crying, but her face held a strange calmness, as if she knew a secret no one else did. It got worse. Laura started refusing food prepared by anyone else. She said Max told her their meals were tainted. One afternoon, Grace came home to find all the mirrors in the house removed and stacked in the garage. When asked why, Laura replied, "They lie. They're watching us through them." Her paranoia deepened. She covered windows with sheets, unplugged the TV, and began sleeping in the living room with Max curled beside her like a sentry. She would often hum lullabies to the dog while cradling his head like a child. Grace and Ethan grew scared of their own mother. They whispered at night about asking their dad to send her away somewhere. Craig, torn between fear and love, hesitated too long. One evening, after Laura caught Ethan whispering on the phone with a friend, she accused him of being one of them. She slapped him, hard, and then immediately dropped to the floor holding Max, sobbing, muttering apologies, and "he made me do it," over and over. Neighbors began to notice odd things. Laura walking the dog in the dead of night. Curtains always drawn. Packages piled at the front door, unopened. Someone finally called child services, but by the time an agent visited, Laura had cleaned up just enough to avoid suspicion. She smiled, offered tea, answered questions politely, and Max lay obediently at her feet. Nothing seemed out of place. But the moment the door shut behind the agent, Laura stood still for nearly 20 minutes, staring at Max. Then, without saying a word, she picked up her journal and began writing again. A week before the murders, she stopped answering calls. Craig, working late shifts, barely saw her. The kids grew quiet and withdrawn, unsure whether to be scared or ashamed of their mother. The house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. In her final journal entries, she wrote of a cleansing and a command from beyond. The handwriting grew erratic, slanted, looping, frantic. She wrote about saving them from corruption, and said Max had spoken with the voice of an angel. She referred to her family not by name but as the Vessels. By the time anyone realized the full extent of Laura's unraveling, it was too late. The woman who once baked cupcakes for school events now believed her golden retriever was a divine messenger, and she would do anything, to obey him. The final days in the Kane household were an eerie descent into stillness. It was as if the walls themselves knew something was coming. Laura stopped speaking to her children entirely. She only communicated through scribbled notes or short, vague phrases whispered into Max's ear. The dog, once playful and harmless, now followed her like a shadow, his eyes seemingly always fixed on the children. Grace told her friend over text that it felt like Max was watching her, judging her. "Mom stares at him like he's her priest," she wrote. "I don't know who's in charge anymore, her or the dog." Craig noticed the tension but didn't realize how deep it ran. He believed Laura was just going through an episode, that maybe it was postpartum depression left untreated for too long or stress that finally broke her. But he didn't see the journal entries piling up. He didn't know that Laura had begun drawing symbols on the walls of the basement, charcoal markings that looked almost religious, accompanied by phrases like, "The sacrifice must be clean," and "The flesh holds the sin." Neighbors reported hearing strange sounds, low chanting in the early morning, the dog howling at dusk, and once what sounded like a scream. But when police did a wellness check, Laura answered the door calm and composed. Her hands were clasped, her eyes hollow but clear. "Everything is fine," she said. Max sat behind her, silent. The officer noted that Laura smelled of incense and her pupils were dilated. But without visible harm or threat, there was nothing they could do. Inside the home, however, fear gripped the children. Grace kept a kitchen knife under her bed. Ethan tried to stay in his room with the door locked. Laura had stopped cooking for them entirely. She fed Max, carefully by hand, whispering to him as she did, but told her children that food clouded the spirit, and they needed to purify before the time came. She was fasting too, her face growing gaunt, her voice hoarse. The only sound that filled the home was her humming, always the same lullaby, always in rhythm with Max's tail thudding against the floor. 3 nights before the tragedy, Laura sat down with the children in the living room for the first time in weeks. Max lay across her lap like a warm, golden idol. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, in a monotone voice, she asked them if they had confessed their sins. When Grace asked what she meant, Laura replied, "Max knows everything. He says the corruption is inside you now." Grace burst into tears and Ethan tried to run, but Laura didn't react. She just stroked Max's head, eyes closed, saying, "Soon." The next day, she locked the doors from the inside and disabled the Wi-Fi router. Craig came home late and had to knock for nearly 15 minutes before she let him in. He found the house cold, dark, and oddly quiet. The kids were locked in their rooms. Laura was seated in the dining room with Max and the journal in front of her. She didn't greet him. She simply said, "They're not ready." When he tried to confront her, she smiled slightly and said, "You'll see. He'll show you too." That night, Craig tried to take the kids and leave. But Laura had hidden the car keys. She accused him of betrayal, screaming that Max had warned her he would try to destroy the ritual. She threw a candle holder at him. He restrained her briefly and called 911, but Laura suddenly calmed down and convinced the dispatcher it had all been a misunderstanding. When the police came again, Craig, worried about losing custody of the kids or being seen as abusive, downplayed it. That hesitation would haunt him forever. The night before it happened, Laura didn't sleep. She sat in the hallway outside the children's rooms, Max at her side, humming that same eerie lullaby. She had laid out 3 white candles in a triangle at the center of the house and drawn symbols around them. At 3:11 a.m., she wrote one final journal entry. "He says the time is now. They will be clean. They will be free." The following morning the house was still. Neighbors would later say they heard nothing. No screams, no barking, just the normal wind through the trees. At 6:47 a.m., a call was made to 911 from Laura's house. It was brief. The operator could barely make out what was said before the line went dead, but one thing stood out clearly. A woman's voice whispering, "It's done. He told me it's done." When police arrived 10 minutes later, Laura was standing in the driveway, barefoot, covered in blood. Max sat beside her, calm. She was smiling faintly, her eyes distant, her lips moving without sound. When officers demanded to know what had happened, she turned slowly and gestured toward the house. "He told me what had to be done. You should be thanking him." Inside, the bodies of Craig, Grace, and Ethan were found laid out in a triangle around the white candles. Each had a symbol drawn on their foreheads in ash. There were no signs of a struggle. No forced entry. No defensive wounds. Just silence. Just the symbols. And the dog watching from the doorway, wagging his tail slowly. The aftermath of what came to be known as the Max murders left the quiet community of Evan Ridge frozen in disbelief. News spread like wildfire. How could a woman, once known for her calm demeanor and love for animals, butcher her entire family in cold blood? The footage from that morning haunted everyone. Laura Kane standing barefoot on her driveway, her face blank, her clothes soaked in the blood of her husband and 2 children. She didn't resist arrest. In fact, she seemed at peace, even relieved, as if something unbearable had finally been lifted from her. At the police station, Laura spoke freely, but what she said was even more disturbing than the crime itself. She talked about Max in reverent tones, calling him a messenger of light, a guardian, and most chillingly, the voice of God. She explained that Max had spoken to her through dreams, then through actual words, guiding her to cleanse the evil from within her household. Her statements were recorded, evaluated, and re-evaluated by psychiatric experts, but each time she told the story, her conviction only deepened. "I didn't kill them," she insisted, "I saved them." Psychiatrists were immediately brought in. Some were quick to diagnose Laura with acute paranoid schizophrenia. They pointed to classic symptoms: delusions, auditory hallucinations, the religious and symbolic fixation, the isolation, the erratic behavior. But even among professionals, Laura's case was unsettling. Her cognitive function appeared mostly intact. She could hold a conversation, recall specific dates, and even make jokes, though they were often bizarre, like referencing Max as the only one who ever really listened. What disturbed many experts wasn't her madness, but the clarity within it. She didn't rant or rave. She didn't spiral. She simply believed, completely and fully, that her dog had spoken to her, had revealed a corrupted truth within her family, and had demanded a sacrifice. In her mind, she was a servant of a higher power. And there was no regret, no guilt, only completion. The media latched onto the story instantly. Headlines called her the dog prophet, the Max murderer, and the listener. Tabloids ran wild theories that Max was possessed, that Laura had been part of an underground cult, that she had been influenced by demonic rituals or hallucinogenic drugs. But tests for substances came back clean. No one could find a single piece of evidence that tied Laura to any kind of religious or fringe group. She had simply slipped, slowly and quietly, into a belief so powerful that it obliterated her sense of reality. Max, the dog at the center of it all, became an object of fascination and horror. Animal control took him into custody immediately. Though many expected he'd be euthanized, public backlash erupted. After all, Max was innocent, wasn't he? But some insisted he wasn't. Some staff at the facility refused to go near him, saying he looked through them, that he growled at seemingly nothing, or that he would just stare at the wall for hours. One officer even claimed that Max barked the night Laura was arrested, not once or twice, but in a rhythmic pattern, like he was trying to say something. Ultimately, Max was transferred to a no-contact animal shelter under permanent observation. There were rumors he would be featured in a documentary. Others wanted him put down, fearing he had somehow played a real role in the killings. Rational or not, the fear around him was palpable. Laura's trial was a national spectacle. Prosecutors pushed for life without parole. The defense argued insanity. The courtroom was packed for every session, with reporters, psychological experts, and curious onlookers filling every bench. Laura remained composed, even as graphic photos of her family were presented as evidence. She didn't flinch. When asked if she regretted anything, she only said, "I regret that I didn't listen to him sooner." The journal she kept became key evidence. Page after page of unhinged but consistent belief, filled with Max's instructions, diagrams, codes, and prophetic language. Many entries had strange drawings, eyes, triangles, and a recurring phrase, "They will thank me when they wake up." Ultimately, the court ruled Laura not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to a high-security psychiatric hospital for the criminally insane. But the public response was divisive. Some saw her as a tragic victim of untreated mental illness. Others saw a cold-blooded murderer hiding behind a delusion. Years have passed since the murders, but Evan Ridge still carries the scar. The Kane home was demolished after a failed attempt to sell it. No one wanted to live in a house with that kind of history. The lot now remains empty, grass overgrown, sidewalk cracked, as if the land itself refuses to forget. The mystery still gnaws at people. Could one woman really lose her grip on reality so deeply that she would kill the people she loved most? Or was there something else, something that can't be measured by brain scans or courtroom testimonies? Those who knew Laura say she was never violent, never cruel. But in her final days, something changed in her eyes. Whether it was madness, possession, or something beyond explanation, no one knows for sure. What remains are questions. Not just about Laura but about belief itself. How far can the human mind go when it trusts something completely, even if that something defies logic? For Laura Kane, The voice of a dog was all it took to cross that final, irreversible line. And the most terrifying part? She's still listening.